Hi everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you on the last day, but by the time you're watching this video, I'm going to be on our Indianapolis campus participating in the AccuPlacer Next Gen sessions that have a direct impact on my English classes. So for my final project here, my master teacher vision, I'm not going to share my philosophy. I do have one. It's pretty lengthy, a little too long for a video of this length. So I wanted to do something else. So I thought what I would do is I would share with you my my strengths statement. My strength statement. If you remember back in our fall session, we did those strength statements cards. They were based on our top 5 strengths, and we came up with some adjectives for each of those strengths. So here is my strengths statement. I am a passionate, knowledgeable, intuitive, in-depth, and perceptive teacher. So I thought a little bit about how can I best demonstrate that for you on a very short video. So what I'm going to do, what I do at the beginning, toward the beginning of my semesters, is I recite a poem. That's what I'm going to do today. It's not a poem I wrote, it's a poem Geoffrey Chaucer wrote. And I recite this poem in Middle English to demonstrate an important concept to my students early in the semester. English has, we have a lot of spellings, the way we spell words, that it doesn't make any sense. The way we pronounce a lot of our words doesn't make any sense. We have rules for conjugating verbs, and we have a lot of exceptions to those rules and exceptions to those exceptions. And we just have a lot of things in English that don't seem to follow any pattern and don't really seem to make a lot of sense. As a lot of you know, there really is a good reason for that, and it has everything to do with 1066, or the Norman invasion. Before 1066, the language that was spoken in Britain was something called Old English. And it's not the Old English that most people think of. Most people think Shakespeare's English is Old English. That's actually modern English. The Old English that was spoken in Britain before 1066 was more Germanic, Nordic in origin. It's the language of Beowulf, and in fact, as part of this presentation that I give to my students early in the semester, I play a little snippet of that language for them from one of the movies about Beowulf so they can hear what it sounded like. After 1066, after the Norman invasion, this Old English began to merge with the language of the conquerors, which was Norman French. It was a very sophisticated language. It had evolved out of Latin, which was spoken in the Roman Empire. Huge vocabulary, but the alphabet was completely different from the alphabet of this Old English. The grammar system was different, the syntax, everything. These two languages had nothing whatever to do with one another. After 1066, after the Norman invasion, this Old English didn't disappear. It began to merge instead with this Norman French. So English, it's the only language I know of. It's the only language I'm aware of that is a true hybrid of two completely unrelated language systems. And the best way to demonstrate that is to read some of the language from something we call Middle English. Middle English appeared about 300 years after the Norman invasion, about 1300s. We began to have something called Middle English. It's not this Old English anymore. It's certainly not Norman French, and it's not modern English yet. But you can see what it's going to become. You can hear many of the vestiges of this old Nordic, Germanic English that used to be spoken. Much of the vocabulary, some of the alphabet, certainly some of the pronunciation. But then also it shows this tremendous influence of this very sophisticated Norman French. The vocabulary has widened quite a bit. Some of the pronunciation has changed. It's borrowed much of the alphabet, which was the Latin alphabet. So by the 1300s, we have this Middle English, which is really showing how this hybrid works. And the best way for me to demonstrate that is to recite the first 18 lines of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which was written sometime in that period. We think he was born in 1300, maybe he lived to about 1341 to 1400. We're not really sure of the dates, but it would have been in this Middle English period. So as I recite the poem, I invite my students to do some focused and active listening. I ask them to listen for any words that sound like they might have been this old Nordic Germanic English. Listen for any words that might sound like they might have come from the French, maybe via the Latin, so you might listen for some flipped R's, for example, some auditory cues. And then finally, I ask them to listen for any words that they recognize, the words that sound familiar. After I'm done reciting it, I do show it to them so they can see what it looks like on a screen. And they're often really surprised at how many of the words they can identify. But first I recite it, and so that's what I'm going to do now. One that April with his surest sota, the drocht of marriage hath pierced to the rota, and bathed every vine in switch liqueur, of which virtue engendered is the floor. One Zephyrus egg with a sweet breath, inspired hath in every holt and heath the tender cropus. And the youngest son hath in the ram his have a coursier on, and small a foles maak and melodia, that slepen all the nicht with open ear. So pricketh hem naturen hier courageous. Then, longen folk to gone on pilgrimages, and palmers for to seken strondes to ferne halwes, caught in sondere londes. And especially from every shirres end of England to Canterbury thy wend, the holy blissful mar to forsake, that him hath holpen, when that I was sick. So that's the first 18 lines of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in Middle English. Most of my students do find this to be a real eye-opener, and I hope it's a little bit entertaining for them as well. So I hope you guys have a really great last day of your session, and I look forward to crossing paths with all of you again in the future. Bye.